The conversation began with the mention of a fight being offered. The name Filip Hrgović came up, and the point was made that there are usually two ways to avoid a fight in boxing. A fighter can simply say they do not want the contest, or they can demand an impossible financial figure, pricing themselves out of negotiations. The discussion quickly shifted when Frank Warren, the longtime promoter, revealed big breaking news. He confirmed that rising heavyweight prospect Moses Itauma would be headlining a show in Manchester this December. That announcement instantly shook the conversation because it implied a new wave of momentum for the teenage heavyweight. The hosts immediately began to question what this meant for Daniel Dubois, who had most recently suffered a loss to Oleksandr Usyk. After that defeat, Dubois had split from his trainer Don Charles, a partnership that had seen them win a version of the world title together. Dubois himself had appeared on the same show earlier, explaining that while Don Charles had been an excellent trainer and part of his success, he needed to focus on the future and how he could improve. His words suggested that he was taking personal responsibility, admitting that at this stage of his career he wanted to give everything he had left to achieve the goal of becoming a two-time heavyweight champion of the world. Frank Warren's announcement immediately shifted the balance of discussion. Moses Itauma, just a teenager, was being lined up for a headline slot, while Dubois appeared sidelined, carrying the weight of injuries, managerial changes, and the shadow of his recent defeat. Observers pointed out that destiny seemed to be at play. Dubois hesitated with injury problems and career instability, while Moses moved forward with hunger, youth, and momentum. Fans quickly began to believe that any future showdown between Dubois and Moses would favor the young rising star. Warren, pressed live on air, was asked directly about Daniel Dubois's next move. He explained that Dubois had been offered a fight with Joseph Parker, but unfortunately Dubois was carrying an injury and therefore could not take the bout. According to Warren, he doubted Dubois would fight again that year but expected him to return in late January or February of the following year. The commentary then turned back to the excitement surrounding Dubois's performance when he was fit and active. Moses himself had praised Dubois, giving him credit for his skills, but deep down everyone knew that a Dubois versus Itauma clash was inevitable. Moses saw Dubois not only as a respected opponent, but also as a perfect stepping stone. Dubois's name carried weight enough to elevate Itauma's profile, but his vulnerabilities made him beatable. Asked how exciting Dubois's performance had been, Moses was complimentary, calling it decisive and explaining that while watching ringside with his team, they noticed elements in Dubois's game that mirrored legends of the past. His footwork reminded them of Muhammad Ali, his combinations of Mike Tyson, his jab of Larry Holmes, and his chin of George Foreman. Moses, still just a teenager, even took his hat off in respect, praising Dubois's boxing that night. Frank Warren, however, kept circling back to the practicalities of managing heavyweights. He outlined that Moses Itauma was the fresh story in the stable. Dubois was recovering, dealing with issues, but Itauma was active, ambitious, and the fighter fans wanted to see more of. Warren explained that Dubois would eventually return, possibly facing a top 10 opponent, but the spotlight was already shifting. He even spoke of other shows planned in Germany and confirmed that his promotional machine had a lot of movement coming. But the clear subtext was that Moses Itauma was now front and center, while Dubois's immediate future was uncertain. Simon Jordan pressed Warren about Dubois's troubles outside the ring, specifically his entourage and lateness issues, which had caused problems in past fights. The difference between the two heavyweights became stark. Dubois was painted as a fighter distracted, fragile, and surrounded by off-ring chaos. In contrast, Moses appeared focused, disciplined, and tunnel-visioned on greatness. For a teenager to carry such ambition was striking, while Dubois seemed to be stumbling at a stage where he should be settled. Warren admitted things had to change for Dubois, stressing that fighters needed order, calm, and proper preparation, not distractions on fight night. The conversation then turned directly to Moses Itauma's ambitions. Moses himself had been clear. While Anthony Joshua might be a dream fight for the future, Dubois was the defining fight for now. Beating Dubois would give him instant credibility, immediate recognition, and a huge boost to his career. To Moses, Dubois was not just another heavyweight. He was the perfect opponent to prove he belonged at the highest level. For such a young fighter, this kind of hunger was frightening. Dubois, at the same age, had not shown the same level of determination or clarity. Frank Warren continued to explain Dubois's current status. He revealed that Dubois now had a new manager or advisor in Sam Jones, and he had also appointed a new trainer, though it had not yet been announced publicly. Warren himself emphasized the importance of fighters being settled with the right team around them, though he acknowledged that as promoter he was not the one taking punches. Don Charles, he stressed, remained a good trainer, but ultimately it was Dubois's choice to move on. The sense, however, was that Dubois was still searching for stability, while Moses already had it. Moses spoke further about the opportunity, making it clear that facing Dubois made perfect sense. He openly admitted that it was the best move for his career. A victory over Dubois would not only make him a world champion, but also break records, transform him into a millionaire, and turn him into a superstar. He understood the risks, but felt they were outweighed by the rewards. He even pointed out that refusing such a fight would leave him in a weaker position compared to taking it. That honesty reflected a fearless mindset. Comparisons were also made with Dempsey McKean, who had gone the distance with Filip Hrgović, but had been dismantled quickly by Itauma. That performance had convinced many experts that Itauma was already operating at a frighteningly high level, much faster than expected for his age. In contrast, Dubois was seen as vulnerable, particularly because Itauma had already sparred with him. Moses admitted that Dubois's style had been tricky in sparring, describing him as a plotter whose movements were heavy and predictable. While difficult in some ways, Moses clearly felt he had already measured Dubois and identified weaknesses. High-altitude training camps, elite sparring, and complete dedication were described as setting Moses apart. For Dubois, the knowledge that a teenager had already tested him in sparring and was unafraid could be a nightmare. Moses wasn't intimidated, and that made the official fight more dangerous. Observers pointed out that when sparring sessions reveal limitations, those cracks often show in real fights. Moses himself was asked about sparring with Dubois and admitted he had been surprised by Dubois's personality, saying he was different from how people perceived him. Training with Dubois in Spain had been useful preparation, and Moses admitted Dubois's style was one of his trickiest. But he emphasized that styles make fights, and he believed he had the tools to cope. Pundits listening agreed that Dubois versus Itauma would be a tough fight for any heavyweight, showing that this was no easy prospect veteran matchup. The narrative of the discussion framed Itauma as a young lion, fearless and dangerous, compared to Dubois, who was carrying the weight of past defeats and distractions. If Itauma were to beat Dubois, fans would view it as a passing of the torch moment. Conversely, for Dubois, the risk was immense. Losing to a teenager would destroy his credibility, while Itauma, even in defeat, would not suffer the same career damage. That asymmetry made the fight compelling. Attention then shifted to focus and preparation. Dubois had often been surrounded by chaos, including issues of lateness and entourage problems on fight nights. Moses, on the other hand, carried no baggage. He was portrayed as all business, pure focus, and no excuses. For Itauma, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and he was treating it accordingly. Dubois had been in big fights before, but had failed under the brightest lights against Joe Joyce and Usyk, for example. Moses carried none of that burden. Instead, he brought the freedom of youth and momentum, making him doubly dangerous. Warren himself underlined the importance of being organized and focused, pointing out that the most important thing was to have fighters ready, relaxed, and at the venue on time. Big fights, he said, required the very best version of a fighter, and Dubois had often failed to deliver his best in those moments. Itauma, by contrast, seemed set up to thrive under the spotlight. Moses did not hesitate when asked if he would fight Dubois. He made it clear that he wanted the fight immediately and believed it was the right move. That kind of confidence struck everyone as unusual for such a young fighter. He wasn't cautious or calculating, he was demanding the fight and insisting it would happen. That was interpreted as the mentality of a champion in the making. This fearlessness contrasted sharply with Dubois, who had often looked uncertain or hesitant in the spotlight. Moses appeared to crave the biggest moments, while Dubois sometimes seemed crushed by them. The belief Moses displayed was the kind that separates good fighters from great ones. History shows that fighters who speak with such conviction often go on to deliver in the ring. The conversation acknowledged that the boxing world was stunned, not only by Frank Warren's announcement of Itauma headlining in Manchester, but also by the teenager's open call for Dubois. Moses was not asking for opportunities, he was demanding them, declaring himself next in line. That kind of attitude captured fans' imagination. It felt less like hype and more like destiny unfolding in real time. Moses went even further, saying he would not just beat Dubois but knock him out. For a teenager to call his shot in such a way electrified the debate. Dubois had been stopped before by Joe Joyce and Usyk, and Moses was targeting those vulnerabilities. This wasn't reckless talk, but a calculated assessment from a fighter already known for powerful stoppages. For Dubois, that was a nightmare because history showed that once he came under sustained pressure, he crumbled. The script then pointed out that this fight was about more than just talent. It was about discipline, focus, and producing the best version of oneself on the biggest stage. Dubois had shown a history of instability, while Moses radiated hunger and belief. If Moses won, he would become Britain's youngest true heavyweight force, instantly positioning himself as a future unifier of the division. If Dubois won, he could rescue his career, silence critics, and prove he was still relevant. But most observers agreed the signs favored Moses. He was younger, hungrier, and fearless. Dubois looked vulnerable, unsettled, and uncertain. This was more than a fight. It was a generational clash. One man desperate to prove his relevance, the other eager to prove he was already surpassing the previous generation. By the end, the sense was that Moses Itauma's rise was inevitable, and the only real question was whether Dubois could find enough within himself to halt it. The boxing world was already stunned by the teenager's attitude, but the real shock would come once the bell rang. That is where the debate was left. Itauma, bold and fearless, was openly calling for Dubois and promising a knockout. Dubois, meanwhile, remained sidelined, injured, and struggling with new management and training changes. The stage was being set for a generational clash that fans believed could define the future of British heavyweight boxing. The choice was clear for observers. Youth, hunger, and focus belonged to Moses Itauma, while Daniel Dubois carried doubt, baggage, and the risk of collapse. The only thing left was to see it happen inside the ring, where all words give way to punches, and only the stronger man remains.